Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us a guy I haven't had on for a couple of years, and only because I was telling him on the phone that, I have an embarrassment of good people to book, and the guy you're about to see is certainly a good person to book. And he's written many books, 18, 19 different books. James Howard Kunstler, his book coming up, A History of the Future, which is part of his series of A World Made by Hand, A History of the Future. It's about, the post-oil America and the collapse that comes. He'll be talking about that more at the end of the interview. But James Howard Kunstler coming to us from a couple hundred miles north of New York City. Thanks for joining us today on USA Watchdog.
Nice to be here, Greg Hunter.
Well, we'll talk more about your book at the end. I want to get that in because I know you want to explain a little bit about it. It's fiction, but it's not, kind of. And so, because you do a lot of research for your books and you know a lot about oil. And that's why I want to start with one of the biggest oil-producing countries in the world, Saudi Arabia, and something you wrote in your writings section not long ago called Voila, World War III. And you talked about this whole ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, which they're now just calling the Islamic State. And you brought up a big point about, Saudi Arabia, who reportedly has funded these people. And boy, that may backfire because your point of your article was about who should run the Islamic State. And Saudi Arabia, of course, is where Mecca is. What's your take on that? Explain your Voila, World War III article, which you talked about this.
Well, actually, Saudi Arabia is really between a rock and a hard place, Iraq and a hard place, because both sides are against them. Both sides that are now contending in Iraq, the Shiites and the Islamic State, or Caliphate, as they're calling themselves, they both are not friendly with Saudi Arabia. And, when we talk about Saudi Arabia, we have to make the distinction, I think, that we're really talking about the Saud family and their kingdom and their hold on the kingdom and their grip on the kingdom. And there are a lot of reasons why the Saud family might have a feeble grip on their own kingdom, even without the ISIS thing going on. King Abdullah is 90 years old. He's very feeble. Some people say that he's on extra supreme life support. People don't see much of him. His successors, his brothers, are now dead. It remains to be seen who his successor is going to be. And they have a large restive population of people they've been supporting, of course, on their oil income for decades. But because the population of Saudi Arabia has been growing at among the fastest population growth rates in the world, they have to disperse the money over a much larger number of princes and people who receive all these stipends. So the amount of money they get every year is going down. And, internally, Saudi Arabia is very fragile. And now they're kind of stuck between the Iran-sponsored Shiite group, which is also represented by the government, the official government of Iraq, and al-Maliki, who is a Shiite, and these presumably Sunni Islamic State rebels who do not necessarily want to see the Saudi kingdom continue. So, there was a report today on the wires that somebody outside of Saudi Arabia lobbed some rockets into Saudi Arabia, into kind of a wilderness border frontier post today. It's hard to say if that's the beginning of anything, but who knows?
So, that would cause a big economic collapse, dislocation, if, for a variety of reasons, if all of a sudden that the ISIS decides to, let's not go into Baghdad, let's go down where Mecca is. Wouldn't that be a big problem? Or wouldn't it also be a big problem? Because these guys are like a tornado. You don't know where it's going to go. They've been funded by the U.S., they've been funded by the Saudis, and they're not going where we want them to go. They could blow right into Jordan. And that's one of the things that King Abdullah, the Saudi family, says they're worried about. Saudi Arabia is worried about it. They put 30,000 troops on the border, according to one report, and they're worried about either them blowing into Saudi Arabia or ISIS, or I should say the Islamic State. Al-Baghdadi is, the guy we had in custody that got let go. But going into Jordan, I mean, wouldn't that skyrocket oil prices? Wouldn't that collapse the financial system in a heartbeat if that got underway?
We've never really seen much disorder in Saudi Arabia in our lifetimes. The kind of disorder that is going on all over the rest of North Africa and the Middle East has simply not been happening in Saudi Arabia. So really all bets are off. This ISIS Islamic State group is a true black swan. They came out of absolutely nowhere about 3 or 4 weeks ago and dismantled the 8-year, several trillion-dollar project of nation building and 4,500 American lives lost that the U.S. has been carrying on its campaign in Iraq. And they came out of absolutely nowhere. We really don't know where they're going next. I think it's a fact that we have some explicit mutual defense arrangements with Jordan and their king, also named Abdullah. And I think that it may actually be a fact that Israel has some mutual defense relations and arrangements with Jordan. And but on the other hand, ISIS descended from another group called the Islamic State in Iraq, run by this guy Zarqawi, who was himself a Jordanian. So there may be some residual sentiment in ISIS for going into Jordan and busting it up. We don't know where this thing is going. This thing is literally a loose artillery shell on the deck of the ship of history right now. So we don't know.
Ooh, I like that. A loose shell on the deck of the ship of history. Ooh, I like that. Oh, I like that.
There you have it.
You don't know. I'm gonna use it, but you're gonna be credited with it. But this is being underreported in the press. How tenuous this is. I mean, Obama. Who does Obama shoot at? Does he shoot at the ISIS people or the Islamic State people? Does he? Oh, he's in bed with the people on the terror list, according to the State Department. Iran, it's the Soviets, the Russians. Excuse me, the Russians. I'm old school. The Russians are helping the Amaleki government. They were against them in Ukraine. We're still funding the rebels, which are linked to Al Qaeda in Syria. Another $500 million. Who's running this? There's no way of predicting how this is going to turn out.
Well, you probably noticed we ain't shooting at anybody, because we don't know what to shoot at and how to do the shooting right now, because just about everything we've done in the whole region has been counterproductive and produced more chaos. So it may be a fact, an unfortunate fact, that there's not much more we can do. One of the pieces of a liberal education that people used to get, which they no longer get, is the fact that life is tragic and that there are consequences to the things we do. And, when I say life is tragic, I don't mean that every outcome is bad. I mean that, people and groups of people and societies make bad choices, and then they have to live with them. And we have to live with the bad choices that we've made in our interventions in the Middle East, and we have no idea where this thing is going. And, I suppose you and I and just about everybody would like us to not enter some kind of World War III situation.
It sure looks like a big war's coming, though.
Well, I think one of the great mysteries, for example, among the mysteries of the last 13 years or so since 2001, since the 9/11 incident, is that, first of all, there haven't been any really major terror incidents on U.S. soil since then. And maybe that's because, our security is so great, but maybe, who knows why it is. Personally, I'm surprised that nobody's just taken a duffel bag down to K Street with a rocket launcher in it. But the other mystery is that nobody has tried to blow up any of the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, including, in particular, the Ras Tanura terminal where they actually load and export a lot of their oil. They're tremendous targets, and these things are all kind of mysterious, but who knows where it's going to go next. If Saudi Arabia goes offline, I think you're going to see an awful lot of stress in the global economy and a lot of fast movement between nations trying to get their footing.
China would be crushed if they started blowing up Saudi Arabia. China gets a lot of oil from the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia, they got oil terminal deals. China would go berserk. They'd go crazy.
All of Asia, I think, would be in a great deal of trouble, and Japan too. Japan has zero fossil fuels of its own, and it gets a great deal of its oil from the Middle East, a long way away, and we have no idea where this thing is really going.
Well, that brings us to my next. Go ahead.
There are probably a lot of people in Washington at this moment who are very, very nervous. We're just not seeing it, and one of the other wondrous things about the present moment is the incredibly poor reporting that the American news services are doing from abroad. And, the one thing that it prompts me to wonder is, did they fire all of their foreign correspondents and close down all their foreign bureaus to save money? Because they don't seem to be there. There ain't nobody there. Nobody's reporting.
That's a huge story. I mean, it's just huge. War, finance, derivatives, huge. It's just huge. And the implications are here. And it's nowhere near calming down or going. It's getting worse. But that brings me to my next article that you wrote. And as we are all Ninja Turtles now, and you write this article, you're a couple hundred miles north of New York City, in flyover country, and you go to buy some swimming trunks, and they're all, down to below your knees, and it makes you look like an oaf, your words, oafish child. And, but where you were going with this is how oafish and childish society is, and how unprepared we are for any kind of a paradigm shift. I mean, big. This isn't a small little bump in the road. The books you write about, of course, are fiction, but they're backed up with tons of hardcore research to paint this picture. Your article, could you explain your take on how unprepared we are for what's coming?
Well, this has been kind of a pet peeve of mine for quite a while. The fact that American males especially present themselves as clowns. We basically dress like clowns, and the costume of young America, at least in the flyover states, is this costume where they're wearing shorts that come down to the middle of their calves, and really long shirts and sideways hats. And this is the costume of a child, because children have proportionally pretty short legs and large torsos, when they're 4 years old. And so American men are really making the statement that, we're not developing into adults. And, that should, the sideways hat, the sneaker laces that aren't tied, I think that it's a phenomenon that ought to disturb a lot more people. But, this is a country in which now anything goes and nothing matters.
Very good. Which brings us to your book, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about this. That dovetails right in about how we're really unprepared for the huge changes. That's what you write about in a fiction format, but again, you back it up with tons of research, and your writing goes back to Rolling Stone magazine. You've had a storied, long, brilliant, and continue to have a brilliant career. This is coming out in, I believe, August, History of the Future. This is a part of a trilogy of A World Made by Hand. The post, collapse, the post-oil, where we had lots of cheap oil. At least the cheap oil's gone. Tell us about, this book and how it fits in with your other books.
Well, it's a quartet of books, actually. I wrote one for each of the four seasons, because I think that daily life is going to have to become attuned back to the regular rhythms of the universe and the four seasons again. But, I had written this nonfiction book published in 2005 called The Long Emergency. And that really kind of laid out the initial case for peak oil and for the financial shenanigans that were underway that were disrupting the banking system and indeed really the capital formation system in the whole developed world. And after I wrote The Long Emergency, I wanted to get to the issue in a different way for readers, to get to them in a sort of a visceral, emotional way, of understanding what the consequences of these great disruptions might be. So I wrote this first book, this novel called World Made by Hand. It was set in a small town in upstate New York after enormous changes had happened. The electricity was no longer running. The internet was gone. There were no cars anymore. It was actually some time after the collapse had occurred. Not that long. I try to be a little bit cute about not specifying when it is. But, these people are living a kind of, an 1837 lifestyle again. And there's been quite a die-off in the population. And they're having a difficult time getting by. But it's not all tragic. They're still finding reasons to be joyful in life, and they are rebuilding their community in a different way. And I was trying to sort of lay that out for people so that they wouldn't feel hopeless about the kind of world we were entering. And then I decided to write, one of these books for each of the 4 seasons. This last one, or this latest one, I should say, takes the reader out of the small town. One of my characters travels to the interior of the United States, where there's been very little news moving around. And in this book, the nation has broken up into several kind of breakaway nations. And one of them is a white supremacist breakaway republic that calls itself the Foxfire Republic, centered in Tennessee. And it's run by a former country western singer / evangelist lady, who I like to refer to as Dolly Parton meets Hitler. And, I think the book is kind of disturbing, but a lot of fun. And I'm very interested to see how the response is going to be in Dixieland to the scenes that take place there.
Well, there's a lot of good people in the South, too, my friend. A lot of good, God-fearing people that just believe in the Constitution and think we should spend less and live within our means and all that. But, again, I just want to tell you, it's going to come out in August. Is that right? The History of the Future?
Yeah, it's coming out in August from the Atlantic Monthly Press.
Okay, and then I'll definitely, A History of the Future, James Howard Kunstler. I'll put a link after the interview in the after the interview section for you can to pre-buy the book. James Howard Kunstler, thank you for coming on and giving us your take on the cannon shell of rolling around the deck of history in front of our eyes. Really appreciate, great visual. Really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much.
Okay, great. Thank you.